Hi, everyone. I'm here with the Novel Cohorts podcast, and I'm speaking with Melissa Haendel and Christopher Chute. We're here to talk about a really exciting project, which is the N3C Consortia, and it's focused on COVID-19 research, which is a very hot topic these days for obvious reasons. I just want to get started and maybe ask Melissa and Chris to give a brief background on themselves, and then we can get into discussing some of the opportunities for doing research working with this group. Melissa?
Sure, thanks so much, Dan. It's really nice to be here. So I'm the director of the Center for Data to Health, which is a consortial program that aims to coordinate the Centers for Translational Science across the US, which is a consortium that's made up of 60 different clinical institutions. And our goal in the Center for Data to Health is to help coordinate collaborations and sharing of resources and technologies for informatics in the clinical and translational space. And so I'm very excited to be here today and talk to you about the work that we've been doing as a consortium to combat the pandemic and bring people and their data together to help reveal new discoveries and new strategies for treatments to help reduce the impact and severity of COVID-19.
And I'm Chris Chute. I'm Chief Research Information Officer at Johns Hopkins, an internist, epidemiologist, and informatics person by training and background. I'm also co-lead with Melissa of the CD2H and the N3C, and also happy to be here.
Great. Melissa, could you tell us a bit about the N3C? You know, how it came about, what's different about it, some of what you've already accomplished?
So the National COVID Cohort Collaborative is exactly that. It's an effort to try to create a national resource that is comprised of patient information from many different clinical resources. The goal is to create it in a collaborative partnership model. The community is very large. We have over 1,000 members in just a few months. There were almost 200 authors on their first manuscript. And so a very large number of people have been working very hard together. So that's the collaborative part of the N3C. What makes it really unique in particular is the fact that we really are partnered also with, and Chris can speak more to this in a few minutes, that's his area of expertise, partnered with the different clinical data model communities, the research sharing networks that really have done a lot to help institutions get their data into a common model, and there are multiple common models. And so the goal of the N3C is to harmonize those models and get all of the data into one model, not just for distributed querying like the common data model research networks do, but actually all in one location with all the data in one secure enclave. So really providing the foundation for machine learning and statistics over a very large data set that no one would really have access to otherwise. So it's very complementary and synergistic and built upon the prior work done by those common data models. So that makes it very different. The other thing that's very different about it is the broad access. We've been able to create a regulatory structure that in combination with the fairly significant degree of security and security validation and compliance to allow a broad diversity of users. So commercial entities, citizen scientists, students, as well as traditional researchers can all request access to different tiers of data within the system. And so we believe that this broad access will bring together experts in machine learning and statistics that might not normally work on sensitive clinical data together with experts in sensitive clinical data or clinical domains and clinicians. And so really trying to embrace the philosophy of it takes a village to bring, to create an environment where people can really work together across different disciplinary boundaries and work on these data together.
How much data, what kind of data is already been pulled into this initiative, and what do you expect coming up in the next few months?
Well, we already have 57 organizations that have signed the data transfer agreement. So most of the major academic medical centers in the United States are participating. 20 of which have actually physically deposited the data. The rest are in various stages of regulatory review. At present, we have close to 500,000 persons in the database, and we anticipate over time to have probably on the order of 1 million cases of COVID with other matched controls across this community as we move forward. So we're early in the process. We literally opened for business yesterday. I think even this early, we've only been in existence for 4.5 months. So in this 4.5 months, I think we've accomplished about as much as we can, but the trajectory is clearly very positive, and we anticipate this to be, frankly, the largest collection of COVID cases in the world, with associated electronic medical record data going back 2 years for each person in the repository.
And Chris, what kind of research are you seeing, at least early requests for access or at least discussions for using the data today?
Yeah, that runs the spectrum. I mean, the fun part is we've established self-organizing clinical domain task teams that include acute kidney injury, critical care, diabetes, social determinants of health. There are about 20 of them at present. And these are communities that have chosen to rally together, or these usually comprise scores of persons, an admixture of clinicians, data scientists, statisticians, informatics people, working together to address the subtleties of the specific domains as they're associated with COVID as we move forward. What's happening in parallel, and is really quite gratifying, is the commitment of many organizations and persons and many members of these teams to collaborate on the common data cleaning and organization of the information so that it can support these focused analytics in an effective way. For example, we have with LOINC codes and other associated information about laboratory tests, we probably have a score or more of serum creatinine measures when a clinician really wants to know, is the creatinine elevated or not? So harmonizing these kinds of elements becomes the initial spade work that we're doing. And I'm pleased to say that we have literally hundreds of people contributing to the process of these data cleanups organized through the N3C mechanism and process. And in terms of commercial organizations and pharma companies participating, many of these people contributing to this data cleanup are coming from the Odyssey community and are employees of pharma organizations. They recognize the importance of contributing to this common work. And the philosophy of N3C is that we are a community that this is pre-competitive work, if you will, that all boats rise higher if we all have higher quality data to do our specific analytics. And all the data that is so normalized and harmonized remains open, accessible to all investigators. So this is building the common wheel. And even in the domain task teams, pediatrics, pharmacoepidemiology, other foci of domain intent groups, we have very large numbers of people rallying together. We're striving to have maybe a handful of papers in each domain with scores of authors that would be deep, thoughtful, highly impactful publications, rather than 1,000 publications done by 1 or 2 people outside of team contexts. We're not prohibiting independent research, but all the data remains open and viewable by everybody else. So it lends itself to team engagement and participation, which we're persuaded, and we're already seeing evidence, will lead to better science.
And so, Chris, I know you and Melissa are both very involved in the governance. What's the process for life sciences, med device, any commercial organization to do research with N3C?
Melissa?
So the process is basically the same for everyone. We really wanted to kind of level the playing field and have everyone be welcome. So we have 3 different tiers of data. We have synthetic data that's still being validated, but will hopefully be broadly accessible. We have de-identified data, that you can request access to. And then where justified, which would require use of the central IRB, which is managed through Johns Hopkins through Chris. Although you can also have a local one if you prefer for an institution or an organization. And then if you need access to the limited data set, which has geocodes and dates of service, which of course are really relevant for pandemic analytics, you would request access to that limited data set with a project-specific IRB. And so these rules apply to anyone who is participating, whether you're a commercial entity or citizen scientist or at an institution. The organization that you're affiliated with would sign a data use agreement that would stipulate that all investigators making requests would attest to a set of common principles, the data user code of conduct, which says things like you will not take screenshots or download data. There's no data egress allowed. There is a publication and attribution policy. There's community guiding principles for behavior and collaboration best practices. And so all of these things are in place for all parties, whichever tier you request. If you do request the de-identified or limited data set, you do need to have human subjects training documented. And all users of the system also have to take security training so they understand the nature of the sensitivity of these data. So the balancing act here is that everyone can have access, but there's some hoops to jump through in order to get that access. And those hoops are trying to best balance regulatory control and access to these sensitive data with security and compliance to the security requirements. So it's really a unique opportunity to provide this kind of broad pre-competitive access. But the hoops are that each individual person who participates does have to make sure they have the proper training and attest to the rules of the road, so to speak.
And I think a lot of people are curious what kind of challenges you've already overcome to try and get here. What have been the roadblocks? And how did you solve them? Because I know it's been hard for any group to do something like this in the past.
Yes, how do we count the ways? I think all parties who've participated in this have been enormously gratified by the enthusiasm, the energy, the positive attitude. We've had only a handful of instances where people have raised serious barriers or questions. I think the attitude on the part of the legal teams that have participated in this, the administrators providing administrative review and approvals, obviously the scientists have not been, what's the problem with this, but have been much more aligned to how do we make this work? Because this is important work. This is an important problem. We're trying to, you can contrast this with certain databases that contributed to the Lancet articles and the New England Journal articles that had to be withdrawn because of a lack of data provenance and a lack of openness. We see the N3C process as the counterpoint to those episodes where we've embraced transparency, we've embraced reproducibility, we've embraced openness, so that any individual should be able to reproduce the analysis of another party or another group, assuming they've gone through the administrative and regulatory approvals to get access to that data. Everything is completely transparent. And given that kind of philosophy, the barriers have fallen away. We did have a little kerfuffle just before opening about the definition of safe harbor, but we actually went to HHS Council and the Office of Civil Rights and had a determination that we were in full compliance with the legal expectations of safe harbor de-identification. That was our most serious hurdle, but otherwise I think it's been a celebration of how do we do it rather than overcoming obstacles.
And so our group, Graticule is definitely really interested in how to bring together the commercial teams from life sciences companies and others. What are you hoping and imagining might come about if we, beyond the work to do curation with the Odyssey working group, but more on the research side, can come about from bringing in these groups? Do you have thoughts on how they can really move the project forward, in particular these commercial organizations?
So I guess there's lots of different ideas, but some of the ones that we've been discussing thus far is, especially for pharma companies where they have, drug development in really targeted areas, that making sure that the variable definitions that are relevant to those particular domains are well curated, and that they can actually, use this data to help inform whether or not there are any confounding factors or influences of drugs, either ones that they themselves produce or ones that are more generally in their targeted domain. So I feel like it could actually help the pharma companies better understand the effects of their drugs in a COVID population. And then also that might lead to, better care recommendations for either being on those drugs or using them in certain ways that might reduce the overall impacts of COVID. As we know, there are so many systems involved in the response to COVID in the body that, it's not going to be any surprise that there are many drugs that influence those trajectories in those tissues. And so I think the pharma companies, with their really deep preclinical data that they have in their own hands, in combination with being able to evaluate the impacts of their drugs or related drugs in this cohort, are going to be really foundational for understanding their own trajectories for their own drug development.
And I would add that the philosophy of N3C in terms of engaging the broader scientific community spans not just the academics, but also we recognize, and everybody recognizes, that there is enormous scientific talent in commercial organizations, be they IT companies, be they pharma companies, be they other entities. And the aspiration of N3C is to bring together all of this talent across academia, across industry, even citizen scientists where relevant, to maximize the benefit and learning that we can achieve from this precious resource. Our ask is that the data be treated respectfully, that the people adhere to the code of conduct, that people recognize that this is a collaborative environment, and that it is open and transparent, and that proprietary analytics are not why we established this environment. But as participants in industry can partner as individuals, as organizations, in roles that make sense, to one, address the questions that are of interest to those organizations. That's obvious to all, but do so in a way that would contribute either variables or elements or content or understanding or analytic pathways that could be shared by everybody, and vice versa. That the commercial organizations are welcome to leverage the prior work, the previous work, the established work on variables, elements, algorithms that have been deposited there by work ongoing. So this is, we hope, a synergistic process, and that all boats will rise higher.
And I'll mention that I know that in the structure of all these work group task groups, there is now a task group for pharma commercial. It's emergent, just started. So I think this is just a mention to everybody in the audience that it's something they can join and participate in, and it's still something that can be influenced in terms of what are the key topics to tackle, because I think we don't know what might occur once a lot of research starts to get initiated, or what kind of barriers might come up because of commercial concerns or other IP issues. And maybe I'll ask Chris and Melissa how you envision the teams working with the other work groups.
So one of the things that we've been, so the tasks, and we had a very quick organizational structure to kind of get everybody organized once we realized this was the way we needed to go. And so the task teams, are formed, and they can be sort of situated within an individual work stream, like the clinical groups that are looking at particular clinical elements are situated in the clinical scenarios group of the collaborative analytics. But some task teams are cross-cutting. So for example, we have a task team that's focused on data linkage and hashing strategies, and that really spans both, some of the technological work streams as well as the governance work streams. So we recognize that, there's a lot of need to kind of do some cross-cutting work. And I think for the pharma group, that's exactly where that group lays, is it's really a cross-cutting group to help coordinate the needs of pharma and commercial interests, both in terms of governance, making sure that we are creating a kind of a space for investigators from commercial entities that is welcoming and participatory, but also meets the specific needs of those commercial entities. And then, but then also in terms of the analytics, as I mentioned earlier, really identifying the key partners in the thematic areas. So really really matchmaking, a commercial partner with specific expertise, whether it be in machine learning and AI, or in a particular clinical area, such as acute kidney injury, with the experts and analytics that are going on in those particular areas, so that we really kind of bring together a different suite of experts in different areas together to tackle common problems. And we know that no clinician can come in by themselves without the assistance of experts in machine learning and statistics and bioinformatics workflows. And similarly, no bioinformatician is going to come in and know the right clinical questions to ask. And so we feel that the pharma task team is really key to bring those common interests in from commercial partners to help actually, be that perspective that where the expertise is in their particular commercial forte, but really bring that to the different groups where that expertise is really very much needed.
Well, thanks so much for joining today. I recommend everyone in the audience to just check out N3C if you can. Start participating at whatever level you're capable of within the organization, and spread the word that I think, at least what I've heard this week, which is really exciting, the data is open for business, and if you can get through the organizational governance challenges, it's time to start doing some research. I'll leave it to Melissa and Chris to sort of ask them for any last words you'd want to share with the audience briefly as a takeaway.
I guess oh, go ahead, Chris, you go first.
I was going to say N3C is an unprecedented activity in terms of its scope and magnitude and access to clinical data. And at some level, it's a social experiment, and we're quite excited about its potential. Melissa?
Yep, and I was going to say something similar, but I'll add to that the social experiment really needs to be by everyone, for everyone. We want to have the cohort be as representative of all Americans as possible, and we want to have as many Americans as want to participate, as well as others in the world, participate in the analysis of the data so that we can expedite the best possible care for COVID patients, identify treatments and treatment strategies, and overall together reduce the impact of COVID. So it takes a village, and it's a new kind of village that's never been built before, and we're grateful for everyone's participation.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your time today, and looking forward to hearing more great things in the future.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Speak to you soon.